If you truly want to maximize your personal development, you have to transcend the world of personal development itself. I'm going to explain what I mean by that in this video and why you must carve your own path to effectiveness and what that actually looks like. There's a base layer of personal development and self-help advice, which is universally applicable. Things like take care of your health, exercise, go to the gym, improve your sleep, eat well, learn how to be consistent and work on things consistently day in and day out. Atomic habits, 1% better every day. These things apply to practically everybody. Like, they are good things to do, and you would be stupid to ignore them because they work. Like, it's obvious that they work. But once you've covered those, once you've got them more or less in place, not perfect, but in place, there comes a point where you must transcend the reception of advice from podcasts, from content, from channels, including my own. If you don't transcend the world of general advice on personal development, then you will not maximize your effectiveness. The reason why this is that you are unique. You're not a robot. You have a nature. You have certain dispositions. And if you don't take those into account and you just blindly make yourself receptive to all kinds of advice, then you'll forever be moving around in circles. You'll be jumping on the next trend, like the carnivore diet, because you think that's what's going to fix things, or you move to a new task management system or way of managing your to-do list, or a new way of setting goals. The problem with that is that it doesn't take you into account. You're not working from first principles. You're working by analogy based on what other people have told you, which is fine for that base layer of personal development. It's fine from getting from level 0 to level 1. But to get from level 1 to 10 requires a different approach. Let me give you a few examples of what I mean by this. Let's say you are someone who is highly motivated by challenge. You like hard things, you love effort, and that's what gives you energy. That's what motivates you. And you're listening to a podcast one day and the person's talking about how you have to relax and, enter the collective consciousness, and that if you're operating out of challenge or there's friction, then that's not ideal. You should just purely be operating out of a place of love and gratitude. And so you hear that, and then you try and change your way of operating in a way that is contrary to your nature. Instead of using challenge, which strongly motivates you because that's who you are, you try and adopt this other way of operating, which just doesn't work for you. And it makes you lose your edge. It makes you less effective. Why? Because it's not you. And that's where general advice falls short. It can't control for the individual. When someone's making a podcast or a YouTube video like this, which is why you should take everything I say with a grain of salt, I don't know who's listening. The person who's running the podcast, hosting the podcast, talking, they don't know you, right? It's not a coaching session. It's a piece of content produced for the masses. And so it has to be general, and it's not going to apply to everyone. Another example in the world of health optimization, let's say, which is a subset of personal development. Someone might say you should track your sleep. If you want better sleep, then you should track your sleep. And so person A decides that they're going to do that. And they go and buy a sleep tracker, like an Oura Ring or like a watch. And turns out that person A is quite an anxious individual. And in an effort to improve their sleep based on some advice given by whoever, they buy this sleep tracker and then they obsess over the metrics to the point where it actually makes their sleep worse because they lie in bed, they worry that they're not going to get as good sleep. They wake up in the morning, they look at the metrics, they're not good, so they tell themselves that they're more tired than they actually are. And so by trying to follow this advice of like tracking their sleep, they actually end up sleeping worse because for whatever reason, their nature is one that does not work well with that hyper focus on the metrics. Whereas person B could track their sleep and it might be the right thing to do. It might help them sleep a lot better. They can detach themselves from the metrics a lot more and not feel as anxious. And this even applies to advice that seems really helpful, but for some people just isn't. Take the example of routines. I would say for 80% plus of people, a routine is a useful thing that will improve your life, that will make you more effective. However, there are a lot of people who actually perform better without a lot of structure. If they've got nothing on their calendar, they'll perform really well. They'll naturally work on high leverage tasks and projects. Other people who have an unscheduled calendar or free calendar will naturally just waste time. So you can start to see how important it is to transcend some of this stuff. And the way you do it is through testing, perceiving, and analyzing, which I'm going to get to, but I need to make a qualifier first, which is that it's important you cover the basics. You can't really transcend until you build the foundation. If you're not consistent, if you can't focus on work, if you don't have goals set in place, if your health is all messed up, then that's where you need to start. And that's stuff that is universal. It's universally good and it's universally worth working on in a way that is pretty standard, right? You should probably go to the gym. You should eat well. You should sleep well. That's not a unique thing to each person. Every person should do that. But again, once that base layer is covered, you want to move as quickly as you can to figuring out what uniquely works for you. And the way you do that is through testing, perceiving, and analyzing. You test, you try something, and then you perceive the immediate subjective effects from doing that thing. You analyze over a longer term the results of that. So let's say someone gives you some advice, maybe directly to your face or maybe through a podcast or piece of content. They say you should wake up at 5 a.m. every morning. This is one of the best things you can do for your personal development. And you decide, okay, let me test this out. I normally wake up at 7. Maybe I'll feel better if I wake up at 5 and I'll be more productive. And so you start doing it. You test it. And you find, day one, you're a bit tired. That's your immediate perception. And then you look back at the end of the week and maybe you realize you were actually far more productive and you have more energy. And so this is something you're going to continue doing. Or you might find that actually you're kind of like a late chronotype person. I don't know how sound the science is on that, but for the sake of argument, let's say it is. You have like a later chronotype. You're more of an evening person. It feels natural for you to go to sleep around 11, 12 a.m. And so you forcing yourself to wake up at 5 is actually making you less effective, right? And so you test, you perceive, you analyze, you realize, actually, this isn't good for me. And you pay attention to yourself. You have to be self-aware, because what a lot of people will do is they'll hear some advice from an authority figure, wake up at 5 a.m., they'll start doing it, it doesn't work for them, but they say that it must be a problem, or they think that it must be a problem with themselves. That this person over here, who doesn't know who you are at all, who doesn't know your unique type, your dispositions, you trust them more than yourself. And so you say, I'm just going to push through it. I'm going to continue doing this thing that clearly doesn't work for me. And that's just irrational. You need to work from first principles, which involves you being self-aware of what's working and what's not working for you. So test, perceive, and analyze. Another thing you want to do to make yourself as effective as possible is to double down on leverage points, which is something that generic personal development advice will not do for you. It took me a long time to figure this out. I said at the start of this video that you have a nature. You have a set of dispositions that are unique to you. And if you ignore those, and if you try and work against them, you will be less effective by definition. It takes self-awareness and courage to lean in to your nature, the good parts of it, not the bad, and leverage them and exploit them and double down on them, because there's so much inputs from elsewhere that try and mold you into a person that you're not. So let me give you an example. I've been making content, writing, researching, reading since I was like 14 when I started my first blog. And just as a result of that, over time, which I clearly had a natural interest in, right? Like I did it for so long without any success that there was clearly a passion for the ability to sit down and write like 3,000 words in an hour is actually pretty uncommon. Like most people can't do that. And I just didn't realize that. Because it came naturally to me after doing it for a decade plus, that I didn't realize how useful and high leverage that was. And after realizing that, I doubled down on it. I said, yes, I'm going to develop these other skills and try and be a more well-rounded person, but I'll be far more effective if I just exploit and double down on this point of leverage that I have. This is what I'm gifted in. And so for me to suppress that in pursuit of something else is probably not a useful thing to do. And so transcending the world of general personal development is finding those leverage points in yourself. It might be skills that you have, that you've developed. It might be aspects of your nature. Perhaps you're just a natural at conversation. You can talk to anybody and you can make them feel comfortable. It's like maybe pursue a line of work that exploits that skill, because a lot of people don't have it. And if you double down on it, you might get yourself further than if you try and follow some other blueprint that someone's made for you. It might be that you're motivated strongly by challenge, like I mentioned before, and you can just stick it out longer than other people can, which makes you suited for certain types of work. You need to figure out what that is. Where are those points in your life, in your skill set, in your makeup that you can just lever up and double down on in a way that will get you 10x returns compared to someone else. So test, perceive, analyze. Try things out, see if they work, keep them if they do. Double down on leverage points. And the next thing in your process of transcending the world of mediocre personal development is to avoid stupidity and self-sabotage, which is much easier said than done. The problem is if you do the things I just mentioned, you test, perceive, analyze, you build new habits that work uniquely well for you, you find your leverage points, you double down on them, you start building some momentum, it can be quite easy to mess it all up. And when you mess it all up, you're kind of back to square one, or maybe square 1.1. And so part of effectiveness is avoiding stupidity, is avoiding self-sabotage. It's a big topic. Could make a video on it by itself, and I will at some point. But just be aware that if you're the type of person who starts getting some success and then you surpass a perceived upper limit and you break it all down for whatever complex reason, trauma, something else, imposter syndrome, then you need to figure out why you do that. You need to deal with it and you need to move past it, because otherwise you will never transcend the world of mediocre personal development. So that's part of it, avoiding that self-sabotage. And you'll start to notice it if you do it. You'll start to notice what triggers it. You'll start to notice the thinking patterns that lead into it. And you need to interrupt that cycle, right? So for me personally, what used to happen is I would build a bunch of momentum in a direction towards a goal. As soon as I started getting some success and I started feeling good, I'd do something to mess it all up. I would switch goals. I'd tell myself that the goal wasn't important, or I'd give myself permission to go and procrastinate and play video games for like an entire day or two, and I'd fall off the bandwagon. I'd lose the momentum. It took me a while to realize that that was actually a pattern, not just like an isolated event. It kept happening every few months, and it was holding me back. And so having become aware of it, I ended up doing it far less. I could sense when it was coming up, and I could actually tell myself, hey, you're trying to self-sabotage. You don't need to do that. There's no reason you need to do that. Just continue on the path. It's going to come up again. Ignore it. So the only advice I can give on that right now is to just increase your awareness of it. The other thing I said was avoiding stupidity. In your pursuit of maximizing effectiveness, you shouldn't do things that so obviously mess you up where the upside isn't great and you can get a lot of the benefit from something else. I'll give you two examples. The first is a health-related one. Actually, they're both health-related. For many years, I used to do heavy barbell squats. Loved them. Felt great, built strong legs. And one day, I went to the gym and I was doing squats and I was warming up. like with some lightweight, maybe 60 kgs. And I had this searing pain in my adductors. Like I could barely walk afterwards. I couldn't continue my workout. And I was like, that's strange. Didn't think much of it. You know, it's just never happened before. Went back in a week later to train legs again. Same thing happened. Strange. Went back the next week. Same thing happened. So I took a few months off doing squats. It's like, it's clearly not working. Tried again. Same thing happened. And so I took like a year and a half off. Did other leg exercises that didn't cause the same issue. Went to the physio. Oh, I tried again a year and a half later. Same thing happened. Went to the physio. They couldn't figure out what it was. And then I just got to the point where I was like, I'm not a power lifter. I don't get anything out of like doing squats other than good feelings that I can get elsewhere. So why am I doing it? Like it clearly doesn't work for me. Maybe I could try and find a solution, but it doesn't seem that obvious. Though if you're watching this and you have any idea what I'm talking about, let me know, because it would be cool to fix it. The point I'm trying to make is it obviously messed me up. The benefit just wasn't great, and I could get that benefit elsewhere anyway. The reason I say this is because you'll hear advice in like the health world. So you got to do heavy squats and so on and so on. It's like, if you can't, then you can't, right? If you can't do something because it causes pain, then you don't need to follow that advice. You can filter it and you can find an alternative. That goes for anything, including your work, your career, your business, whatever it may be. Give you another example real quick. I remember watching, or maybe I was reading an article on testosterone optimization, and the person mentioned that you can take ashwagandha, the supplement. And so I bought some, and within like 2 or 3 days of taking it, I felt the most irritable I've ever felt in my life. I was pretty low and like emotionless other than the irritation. And I realized, like, I went off it and I took it again and the same thing happened. And I was like, this is potent. Like, this causes such a significant side effect that I'm just going to stop taking it. And you might be thinking like, well, yeah, I mean, no one does things that obviously cause harm to them. No, they do, especially when they hear it on a podcast, especially when authority figure X says you should take ashwagandha because it'll maintain or stop the suppression of testosterone. And so you take it, you get negative side effect like me, and then you're so convinced by this person that you continue taking it despite the fact that it's messing you up. And it sounds stupid, but we all fall into that trap from time to time where we act contrary to what our body is telling us in a way that doesn't really serve us at all. So in your pursuit of personal development and transcending it, avoid things that are clearly not working for you, even if someone else says that they do work. They don't work if they don't work. Anyway, bit of a unstructured video. Hope some of it made sense. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.